Hello everyone and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a ranking video for you guys. And for this video I'll be ranking the studio discography from the progressive rock band Genesis. Now, since I have almost all the albums from Genesis, I figured that it would be interesting to rank their discography from worst to best. Now, for this ranking we're not going to include live albums, compilations, or anything like that, just the main albums. So yeah, now the one that I have last, I actually don't have in my collection yet. It's actually the only Genesis CD that I don't own yet, but I probably will eventually get it to complete the discography collection, of course. I've just been never in a hurry to get it, since it is probably their weakest album, not just regarded by me, but a lot of people as well. But at the bottom, last in the ranking, I gotta go with From Genesis to Revelation, which is their debut album. Now, this album, it's more folky, kind of like, so it's definitely, I know some people have said that it's basically Genesis before they became Genesis, if you know what I mean. It's not, the proggy albums that we've, come to expect from the early era of Genesis, but, yeah, it's an okay debut. I mean, when it comes to Genesis, they've never released a bad album, so From Genesis to Revelation, that's what's got to come last for me. Not the strongest replay value, but it does have some good stuff on it, but yeah, definitely not their strongest. But next in the ranking, we got We Cant Dance. In my opinion, this is the weakest album with Phil Collins on vocals. Now, there is some good songs on here for sure, like No Son of Mine, Jesus He Knows Me, and Dreaming While You Sleep. That's another solid track, but yeah, We Cant Dance, it's an okay album. I mean, I do like it a little bit, even though it's not one of their strongest. Now, the second half of this album is, well, needless to say, not very strong, but it's not bad, though. I wouldn't consider any of the songs bad, just, I don't know, they just don't have the strongest replay value. Now, the song I Can't Dance, I know is a fan favorite. It's a pretty big hit for these guys, and I'll be honest, this is a song that I never really could get into. For the longest time, ever since I became a Genesis fan, I don't know, I just can't get into that song. I don't know if it's just its overplayed nature, or I'm not sure what it is about it that just doesn't do it for me, but it just hasn't really done a lot for me like some of the other songs on the album. But I still wouldn't consider it bad, though. So We Can't Dance, definitely not one of their strongest, but it's a pretty decent album. Next in the ranking, Calling All Stations, the only album with Ray Wilson, and their final album as well. Now, I'm not sure how some people will feel about me placing this album above We Can't Dance or even their debut, but I actually kind of enjoy this album. There's quite a few songs that I actually really do enjoy from this album that I do return to sometimes, such as Congo, which is probably my favorite of the singles. That's a real catchy song that'll get stuck in your head. And there's some other really good songs on here, like the title track, Shipwrecked, which I think is kind of underrated. The Dividing Line is also a really good song, but yeah, this album, I don't think that this album is as bad as some people make it out to be. It is probably their darkest album too, and I don't know, there's certain aspects that I do appreciate with this album. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say it is. Now, it's definitely one of their weakest, that's for sure. Obviously, it's this low in the ranking, but there is some very good songs on here that I actually do enjoy, so Calling All Stations. Next, the Selftitled album. Very strong album. Now, my main complaint with this album, and the reason why it's kind of low in the ranking, is, well, mainly because the second half doesn't really have the strongest replay value, but the first half of this album is very strong. But don't get me wrong, there is some good songs in the second half, like Just a Job to Do, kind of an underrated song in my opinion. But of course, in the first half you got some fan favorites like Mama, That's All, Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea. Those are all very good songs, and in my opinion, it's the weakest of their 80s material, but I still don't think it's bad, though. I think it's a very good album, actually. It's just, well, when it comes to Genesis, you can't go wrong with them, so yeah. Not really a bad album in their discography, I'd say, but Yeah, so the self-titled album. Next, we got Abbacab. Interesting album. I mean, this album is kind of accessible for people, you know, that are into, I guess, 80s rock, that like the cheesiness of the 80s sound, I guess. I think a lot of those people would really enjoy this album, and as well as the other 80s material. But this album, it has some songs that are very synth driven, such as Man on the Corner, which is kind of an underrated song in my opinion. Probably the best song on the second half of the album, but I really also like It or Not. That's another really good track. The title track, Abbacab, is also very good. No Reply at All. I mean, there's a lot of really good songs on this album. Keep It Dark is also good too, but yeah, so Abbacab, definitely a very strong album. So next up, we got Duke. Interesting album for the band. There's a lot of really good songs on here, like Behind the Lines, Duchess, Misunderstanding, and Turn It On Again. But yeah, not really much to say about the album. You know, this is the first album of their 80s time, so, you know, this is kind of like a new era for Genesis, I guess. You know, this is when, you know, some people, I guess, kind of gave some heat to Genesis for, you know, abandoning the more proggy side of the band to go into that more poppy side of the band. Now, I don't think that Genesis has ever really left the progginess in their sound, because I even think that, you know, even in the stuff from the 80s and even some of the songs in the 90s, they still haven't lost that progginess, I guess. Now, sure, it's, you know, less present than it once was in the 70s, but I still think it's there to a degree. But with Duke, I think it's a very strong album. So next we got And Then There Were Three. Very good album for sure. Of course, it's got a lot of really good songs on here, like Undertow, Many Too Many, and Follow You, Follow Me. Yeah, very good album. Not really much to say about it, but I guess you could say that this is the album where Genesis was kind of starting to go in a more, I guess, mainstream direction, because this album combines both the more commercial side of the band and the proggy side of the band, and I think it does a good job of mixing those two things together into this album. So I do think it's a very good album overall. So, And Then There Were Three. Next we got Wind and Wuthering. Definitely a very good album. I mean, of course, you got great tracks on here like 11th Earl of Mar, One for the Vine, and Afterglow. I think Afterglow is definitely one of their best album closers, at least in my opinion. Definitely a very good song, and yeah, definitely a very good album. So, Wind and Wuthering. But next up, we got Trespass. I know there's some people that say that this is one of their best. It's not my personal favorite Genesis album, but I do like it a lot, though. It's definitely a very good album. I mean, you got songs like White Mountain, Visions of Angels, and The Knife. I mean, The Knife is a pretty heavy track for Genesis, probably one of their heaviest songs. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot to like about this album. I mean, if you like prog rock, check out this album. So, Trespass. Now, this part of my ranking is probably the most controversial part of my ranking, because I know that there's some people that would definitely disagree with this album being this high in my ranking, but what can I say? I enjoy this album. So what's up next is Invisible Touch. Yep, I have Invisible Touch above Wind and Wuthering, Trespass, and Then There Were Three. I'm not sure how some people will feel about that, because, well, this album, a lot of people say that it's one of their weakest, and, you know, they complain that, oh, it's too poppy, it's too mainstream, or whatever. But I mean, whoever said it, you know, that was considered a bad thing, you know, and I do think that this is the best of their 80s time. And a lot of really great songs on here. I mean, you got the title track, Invisible Touch, which is very catchy. Yes, it's accessible, it's mainstream or whatever, but I like it. Tonight, Tonight, Tonight is also good. One of the longer songs on the album, Land of Confusion, In Too Deep, one of their best ballads, I think. Domino, a really great epic from these guys. Throwing It All Away, another accessible track. I mean, a lot of these songs are very accessible, and yeah, I mean, definitely a very good album, and in my opinion, kind of overhated, to be honest. I know there's some people, once again, that I think, you know, need to give this album another chance, you know, because I know there's some people that that say that this is one of their weakest, which I don't agree with at all, but yeah, so Invisible Touch, I think it's a great album. So next, we got The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Now, this is kind of a hit or miss album for some people. I feel like most people actually would rather have this album really ranked high up there, maybe in the top 3, but for me, it's not in my top 3, but I do think it's one of their best for sure. Now, there was once a moment in time where this was not one of my favorites. I mean, if you were to ask me to do this ranking like a couple of months ago, this album would probably be way lower, to be honest. But this album has grown on me. It really has. I mean, there's a lot of songs that I really like Counting Out Time, the title track, and of course, Carpet Crawlers. I mean, this album has a lot going for it, so yeah. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, it's of course a concept album, and I think it's a great album. So next we got Nursery Crime. Of course, it has the song Musical Box, which is probably one of their best tracks, and yeah, there's just no going wrong with this album. So yeah, Nursery Crime, it's obviously a classic, and yeah, there you have it. So now we're here at the top 3. Now, at number 3, this is the first Genesis album that I think that I've heard. It was either this album or Invisible Touch. That was my first full-length Genesis album. But next we got Selling England by the Pound. This is definitely a fan favorite for some people. I mean, this is one of those albums that you ought to have in the top 3 because there's not a weak track on this album. I mean, from here on out, you know, you got no bad track, okay? I mean, Dancing in the Moonlit Night, I Know What I Like, Firth of Fifth, and of course, The Cinema Show. Maybe one of my favorite Genesis songs. Actually, it probably is, so yeah, and definitely one of their best epics, too. So, Selling England by the Pound, definitely one of their best. Next, we got Trick of the Tail. Probably the best with Phil Collins, at least in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of people that can agree with that. This is also his debut on vocals, so yeah, definitely very strong album for sure, and it's basically a prog rock masterpiece. You got Dance on a Volcano, Entangled, Madman Moon, which I think is underrated. You also got the title track, maybe one of their best songs, but yeah, Trick of the Tail, definitely a very good album, definitely a fantastic album, and a classic. But at number 1, I gotta go with Foxtrot. Yeah, this album, there's not a weak track on the album, and I know there's a lot of people that can agree with me when I say that this is probably their best album. I mean, obviously, you know, I think the best Genesis album has to come from the Peter Gabriel era, because when it came to that era, besides their debut album, I mean, it seemed like this band could really do no wrong, and they still really can't, because like I said, they've never released a bad album, but this is when they were on top of their game, for sure. I mean, you got great songs like Watcher of the Skies. Definitely a top 3 favorite Genesis song for me personally. Same could be said about Supper's Ready, and you got other great songs like Timetable and Get 'Em Out by Friday, and yeah, definitely a lot of really great material on here. So Foxtrot, that's my favorite Genesis album, and that's what's coming in at number 1. So there you have it. That is my ranking of the Genesis discography. Let me know what you guys think. How would you rank the Genesis albums? Feel free to let me know. So with that being said, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and take care.